everyone, this is Nahielly and I'm with Gary and Yuan.
Hi Nahielly, how are you doing?
Not too bad, how are you?
Not too bad too.
So this is our third episode of the series of LLT Podcast. Today we're going to talk about autonomy and how autonomy has changed over time. I think a good point to start is, what do we mean by autonomy, Gary?
Yeah, well, I mean, as the book suggests, I mean, it's something that has shifted a little bit, but essentially it links to the sort of the psychology of metacognition. So people's ability, enabling people to learn how to learn. So to become, some people refer to it as independent learner. But you know, it's learning how to be an effective learner ultimately. So you know, reflecting on what you learn and developing skills as you go along. But at the same time, you know, it's something that is then supported. It's scaffolding by teachers. So it's not. I mean, you can obviously develop your own skills, but there is a suggestion in there that teachers are important in that. And you know, this book that we asked you to read, you know, it talks about, you know, different kind of novel aspects or different new ways of looking at autonomy. So it's got some interesting new avenues to explore.
And I can say as well that reading the book that we have read this week as well, Benson, who's done a lot of work in autonomy, he defines it as the capacity to control one's learning. So there's a dimension of being reflective on the work you do, so what you do, why you're doing things, how you're doing them, and then how you can improve them as well. And that's, you know, different levels added to this dimension of autonomy.
Yeah, and I think it's also, it works differently for different levels of students. So, you know, with adults, to some extent, you would hope that most adults would have, not every adult, but many adults would have developed those autonomous skills and would be able to come at learning, you know, reasonably independently themselves, to be able to make requests, you know, of the teacher, and for the teacher to, you know, to have a discussion about what you want. Whereas when you're talking about primary and secondary learners, you know, that's a skill that needs to be supported and developed.
One of the things that one of the chapters, I think it was the second chapter, addresses is that autonomy is also really connected to the context in which teachers teach and students learn. So if we have an under-resourced context where, you know, there's a lack of resources everywhere, which I can totally relate based on my own experience in Mexico, it gets teachers to think about what ways they can use the resources available in order to promote that autonomy.
Yeah, I mean, I think that does come out very, you know, does come out well in chapter 2, and the work of Lam and the work he did in Indonesia. That sounds very, very similar, and also the kinds of things that Harry Kuchar does in his work in Cameroon. That, you know, well, we haven't got many resources, we've only really got ourselves, so how can we work together? And again, that links to, you know, the work of Sugata Mitra, his theory of self-organized learning, and I mentioned in class that idea that, you know, you have these books now, you have availability of books like the Black Cat books that will read to you. They have questions, they have comprehension questions, they have dictionaries built in, they have dictionaries in different languages built in potentially, so translation. So essentially, you know, if you're prepared to put the work in, you know, the technology can actually, you know, work independently of the teacher. So the role of the teacher, you know, changes quite significantly.
What Gary said reminds me that in my dissertation, I'm talking about homework in Chinese context, in the big class context, because in that context, you know, to activate students' autonomy in the big class is relatively difficult for teacher. They have limited time. They have many goals to to achieve. So I think maybe involve technology in the homework is a good way to supplement, to activate students' autonomy. And it's a relatively easier way for them to complete such tasks or activities.
Yeah, it was interesting to see that, Harry Kuchar talks about, the way that the students were asking for homework, not something that, in the past, or maybe in other contexts, I can't imagine in the UK to the same extent that people are sort of, desperately asking for homework because they get quite a lot. But in contexts where maybe, there is less structure or less resourcing, then that, they have the time to do it, then doing that outside of class important. So yeah, homework is interesting, and that links again, if we want to link this to technology, it links to notions of the flipped classroom. Although I still don't like that term, it's a useful shorthand, and that idea that thinking about, well, what do we mean by homework, and how do we build that in to enable to structure our teaching so that you ask students to do something before a class, you build on that activity in class, and then that leads into further activity outside the class. So you're not simply turning up to a classroom and teaching a lesson and then that's it. And I was talking to the colleague that I work with in the local language school that we're working with, and sort of talking to him about, shouldn't we be giving the students something to do in advance? Would they do that? And so we're going to try that out and see what happens. So homework, really important, and it does help people kind of structure their lives, because ultimately, at the level of a master's degree, you're expected to kind of lead on your homework. People find that very difficult, I know, but there's a reading list. Well, it's up to you guys. It's not quite that way on our courses, but on other courses, that's essentially what it is. You have a lecture, you have maybe some assigned reading to do, maybe a seminar to discuss some, principal bits of reading, and then you're off on your own. And a lot of that is it relates to language learning.
It goes back to those pedagogical purposes, because you can design your lesson using the technology available, and then, as you said, students go away, but everything they do is already scaffolded, because you with that purpose, you design it in that way that they go away and can do things on their own, and then just come back and take it from there. So that pedagogical purpose is always important to have in mind.
Yeah, and if we're going back to the book, the chapter by Chick, again reinforces that. That's people, literally kind of working out, can I learn a language without any reference to a teacher, and showing how, particular kinds of websites like the Duolingo website, is structured in a way to provide that interactivity. And if you think back to the Walker and White reading, the way she was talking about, they give three different examples of different communities, reading communities. That's the same kind of idea. So that ability to be part of a community and exchange language, exchange ideas is an important kind of possibility, and technology allows that in a way that, of course, just wasn't possible in the days before the internet.
Yeah. Web 2.
Huh?
Web 2.
And Web 2 as well. So the Web 2, the ideas of being able to sort of communicate online, but also share documents. So that's why we link to getting people to work in the wiki. So that's why the wiki is part of this sort of little collection of units. So the units around reading focus on the wiki, because it is a Web 2 environment. It's that collaborative type of space. So
it goes all back to the idea that Gao discusses in the chapter of having that interdependence. So autonomy is not just you are on your own, there's an interdependence between the learner, the students themselves, and the teacher. So if that is not happening, then there might be constraints, but we go back to the theories of social constructivism, zone of proximal development, scaffolding, that underpin how teachers might set up the learning process. And again, Yao and Paul Freeman, is that
Paul
right?
Freeman.
Paul Freeman.
Paul Freeman. Paul Freeman, I think it's pronounced, yeah.
Paul Freeman. That Paul Freeman talk about as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting reading the Yue Song Gao chapter. I think that is, it talks about a particular kind of world, but I mean, I would say that is a general in the world, that, that as a teacher, doing different things in the classroom can be significantly constrained by the context, by, what the expectation of students, particularly the expectations of parents, but also the sort of national structures that exist, the notions of the national curricula, maybe prescribed textbooks, the relationship between all of that stuff and exams, and the role that exams play in giving teachers the ability to have some sort of freedom in what they do. So if your exam structure is very, very tightly controlled centrally, and the exams make a real difference, which of course they do in most contexts, so you can't get into your favorite kind of next level school unless you pass those examinations, then teachers suffer, and teachers find it struggle to even though they want to do things in certain kinds of ways and they believe those things are better, it's difficult because of the constraints of the context. And that's not just in China, that's everywhere in the world, that we suffer that. If we think about the tasks that we're getting you to do in the wiki space this week, so that notion of a web quest. I mean, a web quest is essentially a kind of activity, but the point about it is that you can construct that activity in a scaffolded way to slowly build students' confidence to read online, because of course the internet is this massive space with lots and lots of things out there, lots of things that are really useful, but where do you start? So as a teacher, you can construct materials that actually focus on a particular small task, maybe in the early stages, and then become something more significant, give them more freedom. So ultimately, in the end, students are searching for materials for themselves. So if they've got a topic that they need to research, they can do. In the early stages, you guide them through the selection of ideas.
Yeah, and that connects as well. Now that I'm thinking about Murray's chapter of digital spaces, how these spaces provide these affordances for students to collaborate, which is what we want them to do in this.
What's interesting, I found interesting about that was that, I mean, there was that massive project, I don't know whether you were aware of it, Nahielly, in the universities in Mexico. There was a massive self-access project that was run by the British Council. Well, that was a massive, countrywide project that was sort of set up and run, and it was built around spaces, and that was something that was kind of, it was seen as sort of, the done thing. So building self-access centres. So that was what Benson was involved in. That was the work he did, in Hong Kong in the early days. And Diane Sloughty, our colleague, was also involved in that kind of project at a language centre, the language centre as it was then at UMIST, the other university that amalgamated with the Victoria University that's created the modern University of Manchester. So that was a big obsession, and then spaces kind of disappeared and they moved online, and you had virtual self-access centres. And now, interestingly, we've come back round to that notion of space being important. And at Manchester, we have what we call the Learning Commons. And that is something that was constructed, built on some of those ideas that came out of the early notion of self-act centres. So physical spaces, so people have not visited the Learning Commons, which they probably haven't done yet. It's got bigger spaces, so more like a kind of computer lab, and then it's got small rooms that you can book, and it's got comfortable chairs that you can sit on and that you can plug in. You can charge your computer and all these kinds of things. So it's a modern space for people to study in. It's not just about language learning; it's more general. And you see that many universities now have those much more casual environments for study. And of course, the Murray chapter talks about the way that this glassed off space was originally sort of set up just for people to meet, but then it develops into something new and different people, doing what's essentially a language exchange project. So, I'm English, I want to learn Chinese, I put my name up on a board, and then, we meet and I help you, with your English and you help me with my Chinese. And that's the sort of language exchange project. But again, it doesn't have to be done physically, it can be done virtually, but increasingly those things have merged into other things. So it's really interesting, to see how that, the chapters in that book really kind of bring things up to date. So, you've got the business of kind of, what you might sort of consider low resource contexts, where, you're using your own resources, your own kind of human resources. You've got, the idea of teacher autonomy and the fact that teacher autonomy is really important. The notion of group, we haven't mentioned group, but that idea of, not independent learners, it's kind of, an independent community of learners. The role of the digital in all of that, supporting that. And finally, the way that space has changed and that we, in a sense, come round full circle and we're back to talking about physical spaces, as sites of learning, if you want to use that kind of esoteric language that academics sort of tend to dress things up in. Yeah.
So the physical places is a good places for students to develop what Nahielly said, collaborative autonomy, especially when students organize a group study, they will feel more relaxed than with teachers, and they can ask those, some stupid questions like, what did teacher say today? I couldn't understand. Can you translate that for me?
Exactly. Yes. Yeah. So it's providing, and if hopefully teachers do that. So and that's again why we've, they encourage that. So we have our, academic advisement groups, which we've split down into smaller groups for student supported reading. So that's what we've done within this group. So again, this is scaffolding that kind of process. So rather than sort of struggling on your own, with a piece of reading, you can talk to somebody else about it and try and understand it. So yeah.
And this unit models all that through the wiki. This week, as they shared their own summaries of the chapters.
Exactly.
That's a resource there, and as you've mentioned today in the session, it could change later on, but that's the advantage of it. As people edit it, it transforms, it's updated, it involves all these debates and engaged people talking in discussion, and that's that big huge advantage of having that resource since 2014 maybe.
But that's the cunning plan that lies behind this course unit or module or whatever you want to refer to it. It's exactly, it's built around that notion that we do things in the activities and that relate to the sort of processes. So we were talking about in the technical tutorial, so the relationship between the negotiation of meaning. So what you're doing in that wiki space is you're negotiating meaning. So it's at quite a high level, so you're negotiating your understanding of those chapters so that you have a good quality summary, but there's a debate around it, and not everybody necessarily agrees, not everybody understands everything, but you end up with a composite solution. And it's the same with learning how to read, bringing those different elements together, negotiating. So when you're talking about reading and negotiating, meaning you're negotiating your understanding of the text through supported technologies like, I know, a dictionary or asking somebody or something like that. So yeah,
a space where learners become the creators of knowledge, isn't it? So that's
exactly
the main purpose. So it's not it's not only coming from the tutor, but also it's created by everybody.
Yeah, it's not delivery anymore.
So maybe we can just finish the session today by reminding students the purposes of the three parts, the sessions that we have. So in the first session, the purpose of the first session is for students to come along and share their readings, as at the same time Gary provides information about the theoretical side of things. So we do have like a debrief of information, which students can also access via Blackboard. There are the pre-recorded videos on Blackboard. And if you watch those videos, read the materials and come back to the sessions, as the information is, it doesn't even feel that it's repetitive. Actually, it just feels like you're more internalizing the information and understanding the topic, creating your understanding. And then the second session, that's a combination of two things. Introducing a technology. Talking about this week, it was the web quest, the advantages of a web I can't even say it, web quest, the advantages of web quest, the purposes of it. We talked about the abilities that it promotes for students, analysis, evaluation, collecting information, producing their own information through that web quest, and then making the link with the literature that we revisited on the first session. And then in their tutorials, students come along to have a go and explore the technology. In this case, we did it, the purpose was to use the wiki as a space where they can produce this web quest. They can create, they can actually put the links, internal links, external links. That's what we looked at today, which again, creating those portfolios and having them accessible for students to access is just, it goes all around to the topic of autonomy, to the topic of collaborative learning that this book discuss. Did I miss anything, Gary?
No, that sounds about right. Yeah. So there is a definite focus in each session. So, as you say, the first session is more about, background ideas, and then it's, using those background ideas, illustrating them in a more practical way, and then turning it around and saying, well, now it's your turn. So essentially.
Oh, thank you for listening. Thank you for your presence, Yuan and Gary.
Okay.
Thank you.
Enjoyed it. Hope you guys are finding these useful. Let us know, if you find these summaries useful.
Comments on this.
Leave comments like every blogger or vlogger say in the end. Leave your comments.